Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Fiona Glade, Dean of Communication Studies, English Language for Academic Purposes, and Linguistics. On behalf of Margaret Latimer, Vice President and Provost of College-wide STEM and the Germantown campus, I'm delighted to welcome you virtually to this Frank F. Islam Athenaeum Speaker Series event, live from Montgomery College. This year's speakers in the Athenaeum explore the theme of civil rights, human rights, and social responsibility. Today's speaker, Mr. Harry E. Johnson Sr., is a critical addition to the Athenaeum Symposia stage as we continue with Montgomery College's work of radical inclusion. All our speakers are experts who address timely, stimulating topics in international affairs, social science, the humanities, arts, politics, and economics. All are invited to these events. We believe these are topics that will resonate with students and faculty and staff at the college, but topics that will also inspire our neighbors, Montgomery County residents. Today and every day, our goal is to inspire respectful exchange of ideas and the kinds of meaningful conversations that are ever more important. This virtual event is going out live and is being recorded. Please join me first in thanking the team that makes this event possible. The Germantown team, Kaylin Nguyen and the team at Germantown campus, Arkar Kyo-Win, Stan Jones, and Keith Foster of MCTV, and also Professor Katima Lee in English and Professor Amanda Gordon-Miller in art, our two Athenaeum series faculty, who will moderate the Q&A for questions that you, our guests, post in the chat today. Now, I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing Dr. Darion Pollard, President of Montgomery College.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glade, and welcome to each and every one of you who are here today. And a particular warm welcome to two very honored guests with us today. Welcome to Mr. Harry Johnson. The college is very grateful that you've chosen to participate in today's forum and look forward to experiencing this with you. But I also want to extend a deep, warm welcome to a friend of the college, but someone who has invested time, talent, and resources into Montgomery College. And I want to remind everyone that we enjoyed today's event because of the very powerful philosophy of a generous donor, Mr. Frank Islam, who says the quote, "If you conceive it, you believe it, you can achieve it." This is the vision that drives the Athenaeum Symposia. At this historical moment that we are in, and we are particularly in need of spaces where we can explore ideas respectfully, thoughtfully, and deliberately. I believe there's a hunger for meaningful conversations as we try to survive the very serious challenges confronting us, some of which have been created by a pandemic, some of which have been worsened by a pandemic, and some, like racial inequalities, that have existed long before the coronavirus arrived. As we face an increasingly contentious election in less than 2 months, we are desperate for the kind of measured, deliberate discussions that events like this series create. Now, I love this series because it features thinkers, something that I think quite often we don't elevate enough in our society, people who can drive us to move into new spaces of imagination. And it can be easy to get stuck in binary thinking or perspectives that are ahistorical. That's when we need to be lulled out of these easy answers because we have to be nudged into nuance and complexity. I'm particularly pleased to have Mr. Johnson here speaking today because the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one that we should never forget. It has been conjured repeatedly in the wake of the protest of police violence against people of color. His image and his ideas drove a generation of young people who led the civil rights era. He inspired people like the late John Lewis and our own Elijah Cummings. And as we find ourselves losing more of these icons over the natural course of time, it is incumbent upon all of us to remember their words and their deeds. Dr. King's image and narratives are still stirring in me today. and I try to impart them to my child as we think deeply about the world in which he is growing up in as a young Black boy. As we find our generation's voice in the call for racial justice, I hope that we all can remember what our forefathers and foremothers taught us in earlier eras and draw upon their strength as we march on. I'm delighted to welcome community members here today, as well as students, staff, and faculty, and I hope that each of you leaves here inspired and recommitted to the work that has to be done. Thank you so much. Dr. Glade, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard. Those are really kind, but also stimulating words, and I appreciate your message. I have the distinct pleasure now of introducing you to our good friend of Montgomery College and our generous donor, Mr. Frank F. Islam. In his lifelong contributions as an entrepreneur and a civic leader, Mr. Islam has worked in what he says in his own words to create opportunities that are sustainable and uplifting for humanity, guided by the virtues of hard work, focus, quality, innovation, and kindness. It's powerful. We are most grateful for Mr. Islam's generous spirit and his support of Montgomery College. Mr. Islam.
Thank you very much, Dean Glade, for your kind introduction. I should have you everywhere for my introduction. You do a great job. And thank you, Dr. Pollard, for your leadership. Thank you for all you've done and doing to make a profound difference in people's life. And thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with all of you this year of the Athenaeum Symposia. Today's event is special for me because it is virtual, and our speaker is my dear friend, Harry Johnson, founder and head of the Washington, D.C. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Foundation. I've been asked to introduce Mr. Johnson to tell you a little bit about him. I say a little bit because his resume is so lengthy and impressive that if I were to cover it all, I would take up the whole symposia. Mr. Johnson has had a most distinguished career as a lawyer, educator, entrepreneur, and public servant. Here are some of the highlights of his accomplishment, beginning with his work in founding the MLK Memorial Foundation. Under Mr. Johnson's leadership, the foundation raised $127 million to complete and establish the MLK Memorial. As a result, the memorial was dedicated on October 16, 2011, with President Obama, Vice President Biden, members of the cabinet, congressional members, and others in attendance. The foundation stands now to promote awareness of the memorial and Martin Luther King Jr.'s tenets of democracy, justice, hope, and love. In addition to his initiatives related to creating and maintaining the foundation and memorial, Mr. Johnson has been recognized for his countless hours dedicated to community groups and issues such as voter registration, which I love what he's doing, blood donations, HIV/AIDS, Boy Scouts of America, and Big Brothers. He was named by Ebony magazine as one of his 100 most influential Black Americans in the period from 2001 through 2004. Mr. Johnson has also served in the area of higher education. He taught at Texas Southern University Thurgood Marshall School of Law and the School of Public Affairs there. Mr. Johnson has his law degree from Texas Southern and received his BA from Xavier University of Louisiana. I met Mr. Johnson for the first time when he gave me the MLK Award in 2015. I met him again this year when I introduced Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and Mr. Johnson gave him the award. I found Mr. Johnson to be a man of dignity and compassion and caring, who's always in control. He demonstrated his ability to control at an event we sponsored at our house for former Montgomery County Executive Ike Leggett. I was introducing Leggett and the crowd was a little boisterous. Mr. Johnson came forward, took the microphone from my hands, and told the group to calm down. And they did. And the event went forward without a hitch. So those are my highlights. It is my privilege now to introduce Harry Johnson to talk to us on his topic for the symposium, Civil Rights, Human Rights, and Social Responsibility, a look into what the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial meant to us. Now, because of the nature of the topic and who Mr. Johnson is, I know we will not be boisterous, but will listen in rapt attention. I know that will be the case because Mr. Johnson's voice and life's experience addresses the philosophy that I espoused when we established the Athenaeum Symposium. And Dr. Pollard mentioned that. That philosophy, if you conceive it, if you believe it, you can achieve it. Martin Luther King Jr. did that. Harry Johnson has done that. It's now time to hear from Mr. Johnson how and what we can do to do more of that ourselves. Mr. Johnson, the stage is yours. The camera is on you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Good morning and good morning. Thank you, Dr. Pollard, for allowing me to grace your presence and all of your students and visitors who will listen in and look on us and see what we're doing. Frank is a great man. He's a good man. He's very benevolent in what he does. And so we appreciate him. When I was asked to do this a few months ago, we were going to do it in person, but of course, because of COVID, we could not do it. I just want to thank Frank for his support over the years to the Martin Luther King Memorial Foundation, the Memorial Foundation, and we have great friends in common. So we have a great relationship. So it's always good knowing to meet other friends of Frank's. And when you know Frank, you know his friends, and we're all the friends. And so, Dr. Pollard, feel free to invite me back at any other time that you desire. Professor Glade, you as well, if you ever need me. I'm here to beckon and call, because a friend of Frank's is a friend of mine. So that's how we would go with our friendship. Today, I want to talk about how we came up with the concept to build this great memorial to Dr. King. Why is it important right now in our time and history as we deal with the social injustice that's going on in our country? Let me start by talking about the vision statement that surrounds the memorial. The vision statement, as we toned it and thought about it, basically says Dr. King championed a movement that draws fully from the deep well of America's potential for freedom, opportunity, and justice. His vision of America is captured in his message of hope and the possibility for a future anchored in dignity, sensitivity, and mutual respect. A message that challenges each of us to recognize that America's true strength lies in its diversity and its talents. The vision of the memorial is to honor, and was to honor Martin Luther King Jr., is one that captures the essence of his message, a message in which he so eloquently affirms the commanding tenets, and we call them the 4 tenets of the memorial. The tenets basically command the American dream. What are those tenets? Frank said it earlier, and so did Dr. Glade. Those tenets that surround the Martin Luther King Memorial: democracy, justice, hope, and love. Those are the tenets around the memorial and what we will talk about today. Opportunity for all, a noble quest that gained him the Nobel Peace Prize, and one that continues to influence people and societies throughout the world for achieving human dignity through global relationships of well-being, has served to instill a broader and deeper sense of duty within each of us. A duty to be both responsible citizens and conscientious stewards of freedom and democracy. Further, the whole vision and mission statement of the King Memorial is envisioned as a quiet and peaceful space. Yet drawing from Dr. King's speeches and using his own rich language, the King Memorial will almost certainly change the heart of every person who visits it. Against the backdrop of the Lincoln Memorial, with the stunning views of the Tidal Basin and the Jefferson Memorial, the memorial is a public sanctuary where future generations of Americans, regardless of race, religion, gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, can come and honor Dr. King. This morning, I want to talk about why the King Memorial is so utterly important to us as a people, as a country, and how we started and came up with the idea. I appreciate the gracious introduction that Frank gave me, talking about my vision to build a memorial. It was not my vision. I actually inherited the vision. The memorial was conceptualized by Dr. King's fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. For some of you may know that Alpha Phi Alpha was the first collegiate fraternity created and started this country in 1906. Dr. King's fraternity is a fraternity that is made up of collegiate men and men who scope every instance of this world's vision and in this world of doing things for the world. Some of our members included Thurgood Marshall, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., many congressional members and leaders who lead this country in their own endeavors, whether it be doctors, lawyers, judges, corporate citizens. Why was it important for the King Memorial to be conceptualized by Alpha Phi Alpha? Really, it happened right there in Montgomery County with visionaries, men who sat around a table one Saturday morning and thought, how come people of color are not going to visit and see the memorials on the mall? And then they concluded, and these men were Harold Navy, Al Bailey, and George Seeley, and others. They conclude that perhaps, in fact, if we had a memorial of a person of color on the mall, then maybe people of color would go visit the mall. And so they conceptualized and said, we ought to try to build a memorial in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This occurred in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, if you can imagine these men sitting around a table saying, we ought to build a memorial to Dr. King, and we're going to build it. Almost what Frank talked about, if you believe it, you can achieve it. Now, nobody in the fraternity really believed that this was going to happen, because in their minds, these men said, well, if we raise $1 million, we could probably build a nice memorial to Dr. King. Well, as Frank said, the memorial cost $127 million once it was completed. So these men sat around and went to Congress. They went to Connie Morello and others and said, look, we really want to build a memorial to Dr. King, not having any money, not having any wherewithal how you build a memorial, but they wanted to build this memorial. And so finally, they would come to fraternity conventions and then have a box on the table and basically bug each one of us and says, we need you to donate to the Martin Luther King Memorial. And so we would donate and give $10, $15, $20, say, look, stop bugging me about this King Memorial. Ain't nobody gonna build a memorial to no Dr. King on the mall, but stop asking me for money. And so we would give the money. Eventually, the fraternity adopted the idea. And we began in earnest saying, we're gonna build this memorial. And so in 1994, then President Bill Clinton authorized the fraternity to build the Martin Luther King Memorial. Well, not knowing how to build a memorial, not knowing the steps to build a memorial, we just took the challenge and said, we're gonna build it. And so we lobbied the National Park Service, Commission of Fine Arts, the National Planning Commission to get a site. You all being in the DC area know that you just can't get up and just say, I'm gonna do something. You have to get approval from 3 or 4 different agencies. So each one of these agencies had something to do with the Martin Luther King Memorial. Every step of the way, they had something to say about whether, how it looked, what it was gonna be like, and what it was gonna say. We actually lobbied them, had to keep going back and forth to them to talk about the memorial. Actually, they gave us the land, and we asked for a piece of land on the mall. They basically told us that the section of land that we wanted, which was Section A, was reserved for presidents. Well, being that we also went to college, we said, show us the paperwork that says that is designed only for presidents. And when they couldn't, they said, well, here's a piece of land we want to show you. And so they said, we think the perfect spot for the Martin Luther King Memorial is on Pennsylvania Avenue and Southeast DC across the Anacostia River. And so with Ernest, we says, no, we do not want that spot. We want a spot closer on the mall so that Dr. King is situated there with the other iconic folks of this country to make a difference in this country. And so we asked for a piece of land near the Polo Grounds at West Basin Drive at the mall. After prolonged conversation and a few years, we finally got authorization to take 4 acres of land near the FDR Memorial, between the Lincoln Jefferson Memorial, to build the Martin Luther King Memorial. Once, in fact, we got the land designated, then we knew we had the land, and now we could seek a design. Understanding that Dr. King was, in fact, not just an American hero, but an international hero. We set out to say, what is this memorial going to look like and what will it say? So we set out and did an international competition. An international competition drawed in 900 entries from 52 different countries. We had an international jury pool, and we set up the boards at the Verizon Center. And so we brought in an international jury pool to tell us what you think the Martin Luther King Memorial should look like. I can tell you now that the designs came from architects, they came from students, they came from everyday people saying, this is our vision of the Martin Luther King Memorial. The judges finally decided and came up with the winning design. The winning design was awarded from a company called the Roma Group out of San Francisco, California. What did the design look like? The design looked like 3 pieces of boulder of stones. The stones were like conceptualized to be the first 2 pieces, the Mountain of Despair. The 3rd piece was a stone that was pushed out and looked like it was dragged through the Mountain of Despair, symbolizing the struggles that Dr. King and others went through during the civil rights movement to get things done. So then also around the Mountain of Despair would be a wall of quotations. The quotation walls would have different quotes from Dr. King and other civil rights leaders, whether they be Jesse Jackson, Sojourner Truth, Malcolm X, a various number of quotations from people who made a difference in this world and in this country. Well, we looked at the design and said, it looks good, but can you go back and add another element to it? And they said, what do you want to see? Well, we probably would like to see Dr. King's face somewhere on the stone, because in the beginning, there was no face of Dr. King on the stone at all. It was just a stone that was pushed through the boulder, through the Mountain of Despair. And having said that, then they went back and came back with a design. The design showed Dr. King standing, looking across at the Jefferson Memorial with his arms folded from his autobiography. The photo was taken from there. There was Dr. King. And so now we had something to present to the commissions. We had what we thought was the best look for the Dr. King Jr. Memorial. But being that we're in Washington, D.C., and Frank, and you all know how this goes, you just can't get anything done. So the commissions had to comment on every aspect of the memorial. So what did they say? Well, first thing they said was, you asked for a memorial to Dr. King. You did not ask for a memorial to Malcolm X or any other civil rights leader. So all the quotations that you now have from whomever you want to put there cannot be put on that memorial. Only quotations from Dr. King can go on that memorial. And so we came back and changed all the quotes and then had quotes from Dr. King. The design. What did the design look like coming from the Roma Group? The design actually encapsulates a granite piece of stone. We call it pink granite. It's not pink. It's actually a brown granite found only in China, and that granite has little black speckles in it. Why did we choose that granite? We chose that granite because we did not want a piece of white marble granite or white granite only. We wanted something that would resemble a person of color. And so thusly, the granite turns darker over the years. So for those of you who have ever gone out to Moria, you can see over time, and this year we celebrate 10 years of having the memorial dedicated, it turns darker and darker as time goes on. So what were some of the controversies that we ran into in building this Martin Luther King Memorial? Well, the first controversy we had was choosing a person from China to design and carve the Martin Luther King Memorial. Why did we choose Master Lay to do this? Number one, we chose him because of his competency in knowing how to carve. Everybody that we went to wanted to talk about using a laser to laser cut the Martin Luther King Memorial. And we felt earnestly that this memorial ought to be like the Lincoln Memorial. It ought to be like the Jefferson Memorial. It ought to be something that a stone carver actually carves with his hands with a chisel. And so we could not find a stone carver in America to do that. Most of them wanted to use a laser. And so we went to a stone carver symposium in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we looked at the works from stone carvers from all over the world. And all of them pointed to one gentleman who was taking a nap at the time because he had finished his work early on in the day. And we said, that's your guy. And so we went to Master Lay. He finished all his work that he had done while everybody else was still working. He was taking a nap. And he was elated to show us some of the work that he had done in China. And so we chose him. We chose him for the purpose because he knew what he was doing. I remember distinctly getting calls from congressional members, from labor leaders and others. Why did you choose a Chinese nationalist to carve the stone, the face of Dr. King? I simply said, well, Dr. King, in his own words, said we should not choose a person or talk about a person because of his color of his skin, but because of the competence of his character. And Master Lay has a character and a wherewithal to build this. That's why we chose him. We chose 14 quotes. And if you've ever been to the Martin Luther King Memorial, you know some of the quotes. Some of the quotes are, we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I believed in the unarmed truth and the unconditional love. We will have the final word of reality. This is why right temperamental defeated is stronger than even evil triumphs. Understanding that we chose these quotes not because we wanted to choose them, we chose them because we had a council of historians to choose the words. Every step of the way in building this Martin Luther King Memorial was done for us to be inclusive of the broader community. And so these council of historians came up with these words. Why did they choose these words? They chose it because they wanted to talk about democracy, justice, hope, and love, the whole 4 themes of the memorial. We took out some of the quotes. We took out gender. We took out race. Why did we do that? We did that because we felt that hopefully in 50 years, 100 years, we would not be discussing Black, white, male, female, but we would talk about the human race. Some of the quotes, one of the other quotes says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inextricably network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And so we finally came up with all the quotes that we needed for the Martin Luther King Memorial. And then work began in earnest for us to build the Martin Luther King Memorial. Other problems that we had as we raised, number one, raising money. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about raising money. I had to learn on the job, Frank. Think I did a pretty good job. but we were able to raise $127 million. But the money alone was nothing that was going to help us. We needed the consent of all of the commissions, and we also needed a permit from the Park Service. The memorial was actually slated to have been dedicated during the term of President George Bush. But as you know, because the Park Service said, well, we might not be ready for this to come online, we didn't get the building permit until the first Black president of the United States was elected, Barack Obama. So how pleased we were that, in fact, it was President Obama who dedicated the Martin Luther King Memorial. We got all types of reasons why it was not ready to come online. One of the reasons they said it's because of a security threat, a bomb threat. Somebody may bomb the Martin Luther King Memorial. If you've been to the memorial, it is a huge 30-foot tall piece of granite that looks like it's all one piece. However, it was like 182 different pieces brought together, cemented together. There's no bomb that's going to blow that up at all. In fact, they talked about a truck bomb coming down the street and running into Memorial. For a truck bomb to come down Independence Avenue, you have to make a hard right turn and then a left turn in order to get to the Memorial. So we had to build in the flower beds there a mechanism that should a truck or something come into the Memorial, the flower bed would actually sink down and not allow the truck to come onto the site. We finally got the build permit, built the memorial, and we wanted to build it and dedicate it on August 28th, 2011. Well, I always talk about God having a sense of humor. And as we got ready to dedicate on August 28th, 2011, not one, but two events occurred in the DC area. You may recall we had first an earthquake that occurred that week. It messed up some of the venues that we were going to have the memorials activities at. So we had to postpone the memorial, at least talk about it. Excuse me. After that, same week, Hurricane Irene came. Now, I am a man of faith. I do believe, but I actually cried that week because we had to actually cancel the dedication after having it set up ready to receive 100,000 guests from around the world. We had to cancel the dedication, and we rescheduled the dedication for October 16th, 2011. And we did it with President Obama, Vice President Biden, other dignitaries. And so next year, 2021, we'll celebrate 10 years since we dedicated the first memorial to an African-American, to a man of peace on the Mall in Washington, D.C. Because of you all, because of people like you who have visited the memorial, it has become the 5th most visited memorial in Washington, D.C. We're so proud of the fact. If you have not seen the memorial, two things are happening to you. Number one, if you are over 40, you see the memorial for the first time, a tear may well up in your eye at the thought that here stands an African-American on the Mall between the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial, standing there not for war, but for peace. If you're under 40, you are amazed to have a person of color, someone who looks like you, perhaps, a minority, whom you could come and visit. And that's why we talk about the relevancy of the memorial in today's time. A few months ago, when George Floyd was killed, I looked with amazement at the thousands of young Americans, Black, white, brown, Asian, Native, who came to the Martin Luther King Memorial, not to destroy it, but to stand there in peace and solitude to thank this country for giving us people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As we go through the civil unrest of today, and we talk about social justice, what better place is there to be than to be at the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C., to reflect on the words that are around that wall, to reflect on what Dr. King meant, not to generations of the past, but to the current generations. My daughter and I and my wife, we watched in earnest. And she says, Dad, are you going to go to the protest that they had in Houston? I says, no, you go. I've been there. So many of us who are over 40, 50, 60 years old, in my case, we were there in 1968. We were there when there were protests around this country for equality, for justice, for democracy, and for love. And so now we come full circle. We come full circle to having the memorial there for a younger generation to give them direction. They may have defaced other memorials in the DC area, but at the King Memorial, they sat there, knelt down, prayed, and did solid protests. And that's really why we built the Martin Luther King Memorial. We built it for young people to come and for people to come in solitude, come in gratitude, and come in reverence for Dr. King and for the messages that he presents to not just a past generation, but the generation of today. Frank and guests, I just believe that the whole purpose and intent of the Martin Luther King Memorial was to have a place for citizens, non-citizens, and guests to come and recognize the power of one man. When we look at what happened with George Floyd, the power of one man to energize a new generation, to tell young people, you don't have to accept this, to tell a generation of people who don't believe in equality, that we're tired of being killed, or as Reverend Sharpton said, get your knee off our necks. You cannot roll back history. You cannot tell a young person today to get on the back of the bus as they did in the 1950s. It's not going to happen. You cannot tell a young person today, as we did in the 60s, we want equality, and they come and say, you're going to get equality soon, just be quiet. These young people today don't want to hear it. They are tired, they're sick and tired. As Family Lou Hammer said, I'm tired and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I think and know that these young people will continue to express with peaceful resolution a change in our society. We see it all over. Frank, I'm sure you got calls. I'm sure all of you got calls after George Floyd. We're so sorry. What can we do? What should our corporation do? How should we handle this? Well, I think the cry is simple this: we ought to be fair to everyone, no matter who they are, whether they're black, brown, red, or purple. Be fair to everyone. Number two, we have to have an understanding with each other. And that's what Dr. King said. We have to understand each other. And once you understand each other, it's easy to be fair. My mother used to say this to me as a kid, and I'll shut up and we'd be glad to take some questions. But my mother used to tell me, you're no better than anyone else, and damn it, nobody else is any better than you. Whatever you want to do in life, you could do it. And so I set my scope and I trained my kids that, hey, whatever you want to do, you could do it and you could be it. Get your education, do well, and treat people the way that you want to be treated. And guess what? Everything in life will fall into place and fall in line. I appreciate you all listening to me talk about what the purpose and goal of the Martin Luther King Memorial was when we built it, what it is today. We continue the same thing that we built in earnest of Martin Luther King Memorial through our Memorial Foundation. We have programs that we do at the memorial every year. We do a luncheon during the Congressional Black Caucus where we honor corporate leaders, congressional leaders, and leaders of society. But we also show free movies in the summertime for the public to come see a movie and see the Martin Luther King Memorial and conceptualize it, because it is, in fact, a memorial that is a living memorial. We created a social justice program where we would do a social justice fellows program to train 50 fellows from around the country on how to take their protests to policy. You see, young men and women know how to protest because all they have to do is pick up a telephone and say, meet me on 14th and U, and let's protest. What they may or may not know is that once you finish your protest, how do you take it to policy? How do you get policy change in Congress? How do you meet with a Steny Hoyer? What do you tell them? What do you ask them for? But the whole purpose of our social justice program is to teach them that. We have a leadership conference for youth every year where we're going to 8 different cities. We did our first one in Washington, D.C. Back in February at University of D.C. We'd love to bring to Montgomery County, where we actually train high school kids on how to apply to college, how to learn leadership skills, how to be leaders in their neighborhood and their society and make a difference. And so we try doing things that continue to make the Martin Luther King Memorial a living memorial for the future. With that, I'll shut up and be glad to answer any questions that Frank, you, or Dr. Glade may have, or if some of the listeners have, they want to chime in, be glad to answer any questions, please.
I want to thank you very much, Harry, for this inspiring speech, and we appreciated that very much. I have a question that just came to me while you were talking. What areas of Montgomery College and MLK Foundation can collaborate, and especially with the young generations, to instill and infuse in them a notion of nonviolence and a notion of justice, hope, love that Martin Luther King preached us?
I think that's an easy one. I would love for us to talk about a collaboration with our Global Youth Leadership Conference that we do. As I mentioned, we have 8 cities that we're trying to go to this year. Because of COVID, we couldn't go. We're trying to go into cities to partner with HBCUs. However, this is open to any college. And again, it's where we bring in high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors to talk to them about their future and how they plan for the future, how they choose a career. How do you choose which college you're going to go to? How do you pay for college? A STEM component. So I would love to partner with the college on that to prepare these young leaders for their future. The other way that I think we could partner together is our whole social justice program. Already I've been contacted by Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas. They have a program already and said, why don't you tie your social justice program into our program, where we not only train the 50 young fellows that you talked about, but what happens if we're able to train policemen, first responders, and others on how to deal with society and run it through the Little Rock School. Same thing can happen with Montgomery County. We can actually come up with a program together to say that if policemen need extra credits on how to de-escalate or what to do, then why don't we come up with a program together to allow that to happen?
I like that. So is Sanjay right there, or Margaret is there? Maybe they can pick up this, what Harry Johnson said, and make it happen. Fiona?
Let me just give some instructions so audience members can join in here. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Johnson, and again to Mr. Islam. This is really an incredible living legacy, and it's inspiring and unifying to hear you speak. We do have lots of time for questions, and I'd love to continue this conversation. Mr. Islam is also available for questions. Professor Lee and Professor Miller will host the Q&A. If you would like to contribute or ask a question or join in with the chat, please go to the chat function, click the option to raise your hand. We will call on you. When you have a question, please introduce yourself. And I see that Vice President and Provost Margaret Latimer has her hand raised, and we're going to start with her. Margaret, please go ahead.
Yes, I had to unmute myself. Thank you. This was a remarkable Athenaeum opening this year. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, so much for joining us. And Frank, I wanted to let you know that, yes, I am here, and I heard the ideas for partnership. There is so much to work with. The story that we just heard was truly wonderful, interesting. The history, the choice of a Chinese a stone cutter. I had not heard that detail, but I think truly then so much to think about, to work on. The tenets, democracy, justice, hope, love, are things that we all need to be incorporating. I loved the message, be fair to everyone. We have to understand each other. And Mr. Johnson, the idea of the memorial being a place to come in solitude, to come in gratitude, to come in reverence. I can't wait to go back to the memorial with those thoughts in my head. So thank you very much. And thank you for the thoughts about how we might partner. And thank you, Mr. Islam, for your continued support of this remarkable series.
It is my pleasure, and I think Dr. Glade and Frank they have my contact information, so I'll be glad to talk with you about how we can partner. And I do think that as you go to the memorial, sometimes knowing some of the things that are talked about gives a different vision of what the memorial really stands for. It's there for you to touch, see, and feel. So we wanted people to touch and see and feel, and so you can walk up to the wall. There are lights down below the wall. We have special glass, tempered glass, that you can walk on that so you can see, touch, and feel the memorial, put your hands on it, and understand the whole purpose of the memorial.
Excellent, thank you. Let's go next to Dr. Sanjay Rai, our Vice President at Montgomery College.
He's the boss. Hey, Sanjay.
Dr. Rai, your own mic.
Thank you, Dr. Glade. First, let me start thanking Mr. Frank Islam for his vision, for his generosity, his kindness, and his guidance in creating this Frank Islam Athenaeum Symposia at Montgomery College. And because of that, we had today the good fortunes of listening to Mr. Henry Johnson on such a wonderful, wonderful and enlightening project. As far as the partnership possibilities are concerned, from Montgomery College side, we are very, very much interested. Our president, Dr. Darion Pollard, has several initiatives that intersect so well with what's happening with the memorial. We have, significant ambitions from Montgomery College side, from our president's side, some very bold vision, bold ambitions, and we look for partners, and we'll be very, very happy working together.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Good. Well, Dr. Ray, I appreciate that offer again. And perhaps what we do is I'll send a list or send you if you go to our website, you can actually see the events that we have. And so April the 4th, we do an event, and it'll be great to have some of your students come over on April the 4th. We do a wreath laying. On Dr. King's holiday, we do a wreath laying and generally invite somebody from the administration to be our speaker. We've had FBI Director Ray, FBI Director Comey, Secretaries of the Interior have come over and spoke at the events. So I think if we extend that out to your students, they would find a fulfilling day to start their day of service on Martin Luther King's Day, to come out and join us and then start there at the memorial, hear an inspiring speech from someone, and then go out and carry on their day of service. This is a special year coming up 2021 for us, where we have planned events pretty much every month of the year to celebrate 10 years of the opening of the memorial, going to different cities, talking about the leadership conference, but more so right there in Washington, D.C. at the memorial on key dates. I think it would be great and wonderful to have Montgomery County students there in earnest on our special dates for us to recognize them. And Frank, you've been with us a couple of different times. I can tell you the weather is sometimes cold, even April, but people come out, they enjoy the programs that we put forth. And in the summertime, we like to show the movies, as I said. The movies have something to do with democracy, justice, and hope. We show a kid movie in the summertime also, but it gives families the opportunity to come and just fellowship. And so we get as many as 500 people coming out with their blankets and their chairs to enjoy the memorial, the movies, and enjoy just being there on the mall with us.
We will most certainly be in touch, and we have some new and very ambitious programs coming up. We will seek an opportunity and some time from Mr. Johnson to sit down and get his guidance on those projects as well. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rai. I will hand over now to Professor Lee and Professor Miller, who are, they're both able to call on folks who have their hands raised. So those of you who are dialed in on the webinar or on your phone, please go ahead and raise your hand in the chat box, and the two professors can call on you. And while we're giving folks a chance to come up with questions, I would like to pose a question, if I may, to Mr. Johnson. Could you speak to the recent sort of offshoot of the Black Lives Matter movement, in which we've had some consciousness raised about monuments nationally? So how can we deal with the issue of monuments, particularly for former presidents such as President Jefferson, who was an enslaver? And that I've heard, questions about what that legacy means now and how we might challenge or work with the monuments that are standing to him or folks like him.
Sure. I think we understandably knowing that certain of our presidents certainly were slave holders, it does not take away from the fact of their whole purpose of a monument or memorial. The whole purpose of a memorial monument is not necessarily to honor that person, but to honor what they stood for, okay? A lot of people have done something wrong in their lives. So we're not honoring anybody for the wrong that they have done. I think when you look at some of the monuments that came down in certain cities, they came down because of what that person stood for, not because of who that person was. But if that person expounded hate, expounded evil, expounded terroristic thoughts, then that's why a lot of those memorials came down. But if in fact the memorial stands for what a person did in his or her life, totally different. You see, you don't build a monument to a man or woman because of who they are. You build a monument to a man or woman because of the things that they aspire and how they help change things. If they were a change agent for good. That's why we don't honor Lincoln because he necessarily freed the slaves. We honor Lincoln because he was able to bring this country that was being torn in two back together and say, this is the United States of America. That's why we honor Lincoln. We honor Jefferson not because he was a slave holder. We honor Jefferson because, in fact, he said at a time when this country was about to be split in two again, are we going to be an anarchy or democracy? And it was Jefferson that said, this is the United States of America, a democracy. We honor Dr. King not because he necessarily expounded us doing peaceful sit-ins and all that, but there again, our country was about to be split in two again, Black versus white, rich versus poor. And it was Dr. King that says, we're all in this together and we just really want equality. So my point is, we honor and memorialize people because of the ideals that they set forth, not because they expound things that tear us apart. So that's why you see the push to take down monuments of somebody who expounded being a Ku Klux person, a Ku Klux man or something like that. But we honor and put people in their proper perspective because of the ideals in which they espound. That's why we honor certain people like Jefferson, Lincoln, and others who were our founding fathers. We honor Dr. King the same way. While he was not a founding father, he was a founding father of a new declaration of bringing this country back together again. And but for Dr. King's messaging, no telling where this country would be at this day and time. So just keep that in mind. We honor them not because of who they were, but for the ideals that they espouse.
Thank you. Okay. Katima, Amanda.
Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and your presence. I have a question from one of my English 102 students. And so my student would like to know, what does the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial mean to you personally? Her name is Lillian.
Well, Lillian, what it means to me personally is that like anything else, I'm a lawyer by trade. I got thrown into building the Martin Luther King Memorial because of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, because I was lucky or unlucky enough to become the national president of Alpha Phi Alpha at the time when we had to raise the funds. And I could have easily said, you know what, let me do my 4 years as president of the Martin Luther King Memorial and step aside. However, because of my commitment to seeing this thing through, I took on earnestly and said, we need to raise this memorial. What it personally means to me is that it's an accomplishment that very few people could say they've done. I don't know how many people of color can say that they've raised $127 million, not gone to jail, not have any issues over money, but did it right. One of the other things that we did in building the Martin Luther King Memorial, we asked for certain things to happen. You may not know it, but what we did, we required the construction company to pull together a team of minorities to build the Martin Luther King Memorial. Oftentimes, you get criticized saying you can't find people of color that have bonding capacity and all that. I said, I don't care how you come up with it. I want the lead to be a person of color. And so we demanded that Turner Construction Company do a partnership and bring forth people of color to build the Martin Luther King Memorial. I'm proud of that fact. I'm proud of the fact that we utilize people in all capacities, whether it was our office staff or anybody, to say this thing ought to look like and be a place of color where people could say somebody who looked like them built this memorial, not for people of color, but for the entire world to see. So that accomplishment in itself just made me just so happy. It made me happy to see my kids come there and say simply, Dad, I'm proud of you. That put the biggest smile on my face than one could ever see. Or when I see people at the memorial and they say, you actually did this? I say, yes, I had a little something to do with it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'd like to, I'm sorry. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Johnson. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was really struck by the scale of the project and the time spent and all of the different people involved, including different agencies, and the way you talked about the permissions that you needed to get, as well as relying on expertise from historians to select quotes that would be perfect. And I think that's a really powerful thing, that all of these people were involved in a monument to recognizing the power of one man. And I wanted to ask you about your experience sort of leading this project, and just if you have any advice advice about how to lead or collaborate with others toward a common goal of such a large scale.
Sure. Number one, you have to be humble. You have to be humble in everything you do, that you don't have, as we used to say when I was a kid, the big head, that this is me, this is me, this is me. It's never you. It's always us. You cannot get anything done by yourself. And I'm smart enough to know, and dumb enough to know, that I need to put people around me who know much more about things than I would ever know. I cannot talk to you about the architectural movement of what happens. I cannot talk to you about how tall something ought to be, or how wide it needs to be. But I am smart enough to know that you bring in and be inclusive of everyone, because everybody has a good idea. And so my advice to you and to your students is that you get anything done that you want to get done, as long as you're not afraid to share the credit. And you want to be humble enough to say, you know what, I had a little something to do with it, and just smile and keep on going. You don't have to put a big tag over your head to say, guess what I did? Because in the long run, nobody cares what you did, but they do care about the results of what you did. And so that's what makes me happy. My advice to your students and to anybody that's listening is that you can't be afraid, number one, to take on a big project, but then you have to be smart enough to know that if you don't know what you're doing, to bring others around you and say, hey, do you mind helping out? And then we all take credit together. So it was certainly not Harry Johnson by himself. That is not the case. We had a full staff. We had somebody to watch the money. I couldn't count past $150 that I might have in my pocket. I don't understand big money, but somebody else did. They understood big money, knew how to manage money. They understood how to build. Another person understood how to get through the commissions, because I like speaking my mind. And probably me speaking my mind never would have got us through the commissions. However, I am smart enough to understand how to read people. And so when Master Lay first, and we saw a mock-up in China of what the memorial would look like. And he had Dr. King with a frown in his face, looking at the Jefferson. And I just quietly said, Master Lay, will not tell you how to do your job, but the commissions are not going to approve Dr. King frowned up looking at Jefferson. And so Master Lay said to me, but the books I read, the study I've done, Dr. King was a warrior. I said, yes, he was, but he was a warrior for peace. Take that frown off his head. And so Master Lay did it. What did I do? When we presented before one of the commissions, I sent in the picture with Dr. King having a frown on his head. And so they said, well, we can't approve this. I said, no problem. Give me 30 days. I'll come back. And I already had the one that we were going to use. And after they saw that, they said, we approve it. Well, I was smart enough to know that had I showed them that picture in the beginning, they were going to find something wrong with that. So I sent them the wrong one first and say, hey, here's what we think. And when they said no, I said, give me 30 days. We'll come back. And we came back. They said, we'll approve this one. So sometimes it's actually using your logic and understanding what other folks may think in order to get what you want accomplished.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have another question from one of our students, Alexis. She would like to know, keeping in mind current events involving police brutality and protesting, what do you believe are the social responsibilities of young people today to ensure Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision lives and fully becomes reality?
The best way I can sum it up is our good friend, Frank, you know him very well. I knew him extremely well. Both of my sons worked for Congressman John Lewis, and that is to get in good trouble. I think, and I encourage young people, don't stop. Please do not stop. You see, America doesn't quite understand what it doesn't understand. When it comes to social justice, you have two different thoughts of it. There's a segment of America that believes there's nothing wrong, so stop talking to me about social justice. There's another segment that says there is something wrong, we need social justice. In my neighborhood, a few weeks ago, someone went into a neighbor's yard and took their Black Lives sign out of the yard and tore it up. Now, you know, if it offends you that much, then you're in the wrong era in which we live. As I said earlier, young folks aren't going to take it like they took it in the 60s. In the 60s, we marched, we protested, we got a few jobs, and we were happy to get along. Young people today just feel, they know, and they believe that something is just not right with what's going on in society. When you have multiple killings of people of color for no obvious reasons by the folks who are supposed to protect them, when you get stopped by the police for no obvious reason other than you being a person of color, something's wrong. When you look at society, you look at what happened right after George Floyd got murdered. Corporations that were not, who claimed they had no money at all of a sudden after that man was killed, guess what? They started throwing money at the Urban League, NAACP, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Well, how come you're throwing money at this now? How come you didn't throw money at this before? There's a social conscience that must occur in corporate America, in white America, and in Black America, and brown America say, guess what, guys? If you had money, if you didn't have any money, that's fine. But now all of a sudden you got money to throw at a problem. How come we couldn't throw money at the problem? How come we can't continue to help uplift society so that nobody has to go through this again? This is not about money. This is about being just. This is about being able to walk down the street and not be looked upon crazy. This is about driving down the street and a policeman not stopping you just because I feel I got the authority to do it, as opposed to, I understand your plight. Understanding as a young man in Atlanta that got killed because he was in the driveway at the Wendy's. Think about it. And that's what people of color see all day. Had he been white, it never would have happened. So you almost have to take yourself and put yourself in that person's shoes and say, what would I do if I was that person? That's what young people are looking for. They're looking for justice. And I say, do not stop until you achieve or we achieve what you're looking for. And that is equalization and social justice.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions from Amanda and Katima or from the audience members? Then I would like to say that as our time draws to a close, I'd like to thank again our special guest, Mr. Johnson, and also thank again our donor, Mr. Islam, for joining us today and for everything you do to make this possible. Mr. Johnson, your words today have been galvanizing, insightful. What a great conversation and a great call to action. And I think that all of us, if we can see this, we can believe it, then we can achieve it, in the words of Mr. Islam. And we've heard some really fantastic ways today in which we can do that. So thank you to all of you, to our panelists, and to all of our audience members for joining us today. A recording of the event will be available later at the Montgomery College Athenaeum Series homepage. And to get credit for attending, you will receive an email because you registered, showing that you attended today. Our next Athenaeum event, also virtual, will feature Holocaust survivor Mrs. Dora Clayman, and that will be on 10 November. So please watch all of the usual spaces so that you can click in and join us again at Montgomery College for that event. Thank you again, Mr. Islam, and special thanks today again to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I appreciate being
Thank you very
here.
much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.